I saw this morning and I thought, isn't this crazy for the Canadian media to be positioning this in this tweet? CP24 is tweeting, quote, "Top Iranian leader. Trump is a clown who will betray Iranians." Why is Canada pushing talking points from the Iranian state media? Really, it's really, really odd. Jarring, in fact. Here's the Globe and Mail reporting yesterday, 20 hours ago, Chrystia Freeland will operate out of the same building as the Prime Minister's office. So, and it's even sharing the chief of staff, it looks like, the chief person who reports to them. It is, well, the article says it's unprecedented in Canadian history. I don't ever remember, and I wasn't paying close attention when Mr. Mulroney had a deputy prime minister because I was a kid. But I don't remember anything like this in Canadian history, and apparently it's an unprecedented situation. So here we go. Chrystia Freeland will operate out of the same building as the Prime Minister's office. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland and her staff will operate out of the same building as the Prime Minister's office in Ottawa, illustrating how closely she will be working with Justin Trudeau on key files on a daily basis. I guess that depends on how often he shows up at the office. Usually he takes Mondays off and, you know, He's got private meetings. I wonder if the itinerary will say private meetings with Deputy PM, or if, well, as we've seen, the Deputy PM gets her own spot on the Prime Minister's itinerary page. They're not going to have two itinerary pages. They're just going to put Deputy Prime Minister Freeland in there. Okay, back to this. Since Mr. Trudeau appointed Ms. Freeland as his second in command in November, there have been questions about the scope of her responsibilities and how she will fulfill her new role in the government. And this came to mind. It's like after 3 months, right? Like the election was about 3 months ago, October 21st, so January 17th, right? And no clearly defined role. And did anybody understand or was told, or did Ms. Freeland mention or Mr. Trudeau mention that this was going to be happening? You know, vote for me. I'll let Miss Freeland do the job. Oh, okay. Weird, right? So back to this. On a daily basis, yes. New role in the government. What does she do? Okay, in an internal note sent out on Wednesday, the PMO Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, told senior Liberal officials that Ms. Freeland's offices will be located in the same building as Mr. Trudeau's office at 80 Wellington Street, across from Parliament Hill. Ms. Telford added that Jeremy Broadhurst, the Chief of Staff to Ms. Freeland, will simultaneously hold the position of senior advisor to Mr. Trudeau in a cross-reporting position. Ms. Telford said in her note that offices of Mr. Trudeau and Ms. Freeland will be, quote, highly integrated and collaborative. After Ms. Telford's note started circulating inside government, a copy was obtained by the Globe and Mail. University of Moncton political science professor Donald Savoy, who has written extensively about the inner workings of various governments, said integration of Mr. Trudeau's and Ms. Freeland's office is unprecedented. There have been other deputy prime ministers in Canadian history, such as Don Mazenowski under Brian Mulroney and Anne McClellan under Paul Martin, but Professor Savoy said Ms. Freeland will likely carry even more weight than her predecessors. She has a key role to play on a number of files that have traditionally been in the purview of the Prime Minister, such as intergovernmental relations, national unity, and relations with the United States, Professor Savoy said in an interview. This Prime Minister has decided to share these files with her, which says a lot. In addition to being Deputy Prime Minister, Ms. Freeland is Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, which puts her at the heart of efforts to deal with Western alienation. In her mandate letter released in December, Mr. Trudeau also gave her a role to play on issues such as the fight against climate change, reconciliation with Indigenous Canadians, and healthcare reform. While Ms. Freeland is no longer the Minister of Foreign Affairs, she has kept responsibility for Canada-U.S. relations in cabinet. Okay, I want to point out here that Donald Trump dislikes this woman immensely. Like, a lot. Like, one of the things he wanted for the USMCA to be closed was dairy. The other thing he wanted was anybody else to negotiate it than Ms. Freeland. So what do you do when you're reelected in a minority government? You put her in charge of U.S. relations, U.S.-Canada relations. Good job, Mr. Trudeau. Back to this. Professor Savoy said there is a sense that Mr. Trudeau has decided to step away from the limelight. The limelight? Oh, because he doesn't like wearing blackface anymore, right? I get it. Back to this. After the Liberals were reduced to a minority on October 21st, and that Ms. Freeland will be getting a lot of visibility in her T-shirts that say "Mama is not equal to chopped liver." Another key PMO official is Ben Chin, who will oversee communications and will be involved in files such as intergovernmental affairs, budget planning, and the completion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. From Mr. Chin is the former chief of staff to Finance Minister Bill Morneau. And do you remember the Jody Wilson-Raybould thing? You know, it was kind of a big deal last year, right? This is Global News reporting in February of 2019. That's a year ago. The key players named in the Jody Wilson's-Raybould's bombshell testimony on the SNC-Lavalin affair. And Mr. Ben Chin is very well represented here. He was a key player, right? Ben Chin, chief of staff to the Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Ben Chin previously worked as a Liberal leader, Christy Clark's communication director, and then he ended up working for Minister Morneau. On September 6th, one of the first communications about the DPA was received from outside our department. She said Ben Chin, Minister Morneau's chief of staff, emailed my chief of staff, and they arranged to talk. He wanted to talk about SNC and what we could do, if anything, to address this. Global News reached out to Chin for comment. Morneau's press secretary, Pierre Olivier Herbert, responded on Chin's behalf, saying that at no time did Mr. Morneau nor members of his office pressure the former Minister of Justice and Attorney General into making any decision regarding the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. However, on August 14th, the ethics commissioner ruled that, yeah, there was pressure. There was inappropriate pressure put on Mr. Wilson-Raybould by Trudeau, his inner circle, the PMO, and other people throughout the administration. So, I mean, I'm not sure why that's not updated or corrected, but yes, there was pressure. So I think that's really interesting, right? But what happens when you put illegal pressure, it's illegal. They broke laws, right? Ethics Commission is laws, as far as I understand it. You get promoted, right? Finance Minister, Chief of Staff Ben Chin moves to the Prime Minister's office. That was in May. So that was before they knew it was against the law or knew it was a breach or whatever. But has anything changed? No. He's been given more power, right? Here you go. Key player, right? Doesn't that just seem wild? It seems wild. Here's another corporate welfare story, and I'm going to tie this into a couple of other stories. And it's actually a pretty short video this morning, so weird. Here we go. The Toronto Sun is reporting, Canadian Tire takes Trudeau's corporate welfare for green cars. At what point do we just admit that without huge subsidies, the electric vehicle industry wouldn't exist? Electric cars and the connected issue of climate change are the latest excuse for corporate welfare, the act of taking your hard-earned tax dollars, and giving them to, in this case, a very profitable company. Canadian Tire, come on down. You're the next contestant on The Price is Right Corporate Welfare Edition. The company, which owns their iconic retail stores, Mark's Clothing Outlet, Sport Chek, and more, had revenues of $14 billion last year and a net income of $783 million. So I have to ask, why on earth is the federal government giving them any money? Never mind $2.7 million to build 54 electric vehicle EV fast chargers at Canadian Tire locations across central and western Canada. To top it off, the government of British Columbia is kicking in an extra $275,000 for charging stations in that province. Have I mentioned that Canadian Tire owns roughly 300 gas stations across the country? They make a lot of money selling the product that the federal government doesn't like and wants done away with. And despite all this, the federal government and the BC government are putting tax dollars into a scheme to charge vehicles bought and paid for by people who can afford higher than average vehicle prices. It's part of a whole idea that we've got to subsidize people and corporations who have the money to go green on their own to do the right thing. Do you remember Loblaws getting federal money to install new fridges? And here's just a quick report from December 15th, 2019. Electric vehicle sales plummet in Ontario after rebate cancellation. Yeah, sales of electric vehicles in Ontario have plummeted since the Progressive Conservative government canceled the rebate last year, hampering progress towards a national target. Oh no. In the first 6 months of the year, sales in Ontario were down more than 55% from the same period in 2018, according to data from Electric Mobility Canada. In the second quarter of this year, 2,933 vehicles were sold in the province, down from 7,110 in the same period last year. Ontario is the only province not seeing increased sales year over year. And yeah, I mean, that goes to the point here, right? Like, the electric car industry is heavily subsidized, and now we're including government subsidy for big corporations again, which just seems ridiculous. And here's an article from March 14th, 2013. There's an updated one. Hold on, let me get that. Okay, so in 2013, they were saying Germany's green energy disaster is a cautionary tale for world leaders. But Germany didn't take their own advice. Fast forward to 2019, and it says This is Forbes again. It says renewables threaten Germany's economy and energy supply, McKinsey warns in new report. And there's more. I was going to go through this one. This is May 6, 2019. It says the reason renewables can't power modern civilization is because they were never meant to. And it goes through. Instead of me trying to patchwork it, I'll let the article do the speaking. Here we go. One of Germany's largest newspapers, Die Welt, excuse me if I've got that wrong, Die Welt, summarized the findings of the McKinsey report in a single word: disastrous. Quote, problems are manifesting in all three dimensions of the energy industry triangle: climate protection, the security of supply, and economic efficiency, writes McKinsey. In 2018, Germany produced 866 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, a far cry from its goal of 750 million tons by 2020. Thanks to slightly warmer winter, emissions in Germany went down slightly in 2018, but not enough to change the overall trend. If emission reductions continue at the same pace they did over the past decade, then CO2 targets for 2020 will only be reached 8 years later, and 2030 targets will not be reached until 2046. Germany has failed to even come close to reducing its primary energy consumption to levels it hoped. McKinsey says Germany is just 39% towards its goal of primary energy reduction. And the main point here is, despite massive subsidies, this is very expensive, that's all they've achieved. Okay, and Germany is held up as like the success story of the world. Okay, back to this. Despite much hype, Germany still generates just 35% of its electricity from renewables. And if biomass burning, often dirtier than coal, is excluded, wind, water, and solar electricity in Germany account for just 27% of electricity generated in 2018. But McKinsey issued its strongest warnings when it comes to Germany's increasingly insecure energy supply due to its heavy reliance on intermittent solar and wind. For 3 days in June 2019, the electricity grid came close to blackouts. Only short-term imports from neighboring countries were able to stabilize the grid, the consultancy notes. As a result, Germany's energy supply shortage, the highest observed cost of short-term, quote, balancing energy, skyrocketed from $64 in 2017 to $37,856 in 2019. It can be assumed that security of supply will continue to worsen in the future, says McKinley. Renewables are causing similarly high-priced shocks in other parts of the world, including Texas, Australia, and California. And Britain and Australia have faced similar energy supply problems in recent years as they have attempted to transition to intermittent renewables. I mean, it seems like a foregone conclusion, right? This only works when the wind blows and the sun shines. Oh yeah, no, we get that. Okay, so there's going to be power outages. Yeah, it works when the wind blows and the sun shines. Yeah, we said that. Yep, we heard you. Okay, intermittent power. Is anybody surprised? Like, it's kind of written into the whole thing. That's why because the stored power in fossil fuels can be put into a tank and then used on demand by the engine, right? We can't do that with sunlight. The batteries are inefficient and they're bad in the cold, specifically in Canada, right? Can you imagine having a Tesla in minus 46 weather out in Edmonton, parked outside? You'd be putting you'd be bringing her inside. We're putting the Tesla in the kitchen. It's just insanity. It doesn't make sense. But I mean, whatever. If Germany wanted to ignore the people who were saying this is a disaster already and double down, I mean, that's what these articles are about. This article here is about how much money they've spent disastrously on this, like $36 billion annually for the renewables that they're using, and politicians are worried about people just giving up on it altogether because it's not working, right? So, I mean, interesting stuff. Are we destined to walk right into exactly the same trap that the German people have walked into, that the United Kingdom people have walked into? Is that what we're going to do? It looks like it. The other day, somebody was murdered downtown Guelph, right? Just the violence is increasing. It's getting more expensive to live. And they're saying, you know what, if you just give us more tax dollars, we'll fix this pesky environment. And that doesn't work. It's just expensive. It's expensive and it destabilizes the grid. The solutions they're proposing are failures. It doesn't work. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com and have a wonderful, wonderful